So RiverRock Medical really started way back in med school. I went to an osteopathic medical school, and one of the quotes they were fond of reciting was from Andrew Taylor Still, the founder of osteopathy, who said that the role of the physician should be to find health. Any fool can find disease. And that started me asking the question, well, what is health? How do we define health? And all the things I came across were a bit generic, sort of general well being. And then many people defaulted to sort of the notion of the absence of disease. Well, that starts you right back to chasing disease. And so that couldn't, be what he meant. Um, and I started to realize that health in many ways is the ability to manifest, if you will, though I don't mean that in a spiritual sense, to manifest the life that you want, the life that you dream about, the things that are most important to you. And that means it has to be personalized. It has to go very deep into the things you find most meaningful. And the role of the physician is to explore what is meaningful to you and to come up with a plan for optimizing that. Now, duration of life matters, but probably not as much as depth. And so the practice started there, and really everything is in service of that. The concierge model, the technology that I use, all of the things I do for longevity are in service of this notion of maximizing the combination of both length of life and depth, meaning and purpose of life. So that's how it got started. I've got a variety of answers to that. So there are some simple ones. For instance, I had a patient who had been having seizures for like 10 years, had lost his driver's license, was having to take the bus to work, and had seen two neurologists, tried a couple different medications. And he was, his communication was a bit unusual. Maybe he was on the spectrum or something like that, but not significant, just bit pedantic maybe in his way of speaking, and my father's the same way, so I was a little bit used to it. And I just had an hour to spend with him and to look at the videos that his girlfriend had taken of those seizures and all of that stuff. And I'm not a neurologist, but I said, well, let me read up. And so I did a little bit of reading, spent an hour or two kind of looking it up. Turns out he fit the exact sort of description of a condition called or specific, not the specific condition, but a very unusual subtype of epilepsy. And it only responded to certain medications. So we started him on one of those, didn't have a seizure again, and went back to his life. And I realized that, he'd been dealing with this for 10 years because he could never get a couple of hours of a doctor's time. That just isn't available in our system. And so he would have continued dealing with it because he never got a chance to tell the whole story. And one of the things we were taught in medical school is that if you listen long enough, the patient will tell you the diagnosis. You just have to keep listening. And we've lost the ability to do that. So that's one example. Another example I really like, though it prevented him from renewing his membership with me. Um, Patient came in, pretty fit guy, pretty healthy. We did some longevity, strength, VO2 max testing, um, had great relationships. And I asked him, like, what do you find most meaningful? And we started diving into that. And he came to realize that what was most meaningful in his life was his relationships with his family. And I said, well, how many hours a week are you spending on those relationships? And he realized not that many. He was spending more time on work and more time on other things. And his budget of time, the way he was spending his time in a week, was not in keeping with his deepest values. And so he just very intentionally shifted to calling his brother more and, talking more to his parents. Well, once that started to happen, his brother said, I'm not loving my job. I've been kind of thinking about moving. Let me move down. So his brother moved into town because they were connecting more deeply. Now he's spending even more time with his family. Um, so his quality of life, the meaning that he felt in his life skyrocketed from that. Then we started talking about work, and he was like, work isn't as fulfilling as it used to be. It used to be a smaller team. Now I'm managing a team of 200 people. Not really what I like. And so we started talking about that. And ultimately, we kind of said, well, maybe you need to go join a startup. And so he did. And he gave up his job and went and found a startup that he was really passionate about and excited about. And even though it was a lower income, the quality and meaning of his life, again, took a huge step up. And so he was already doing all the longevity stuff. His VO2 max was great. His strength was great. His social connections, he wasn't smoking, and, his blood pressure was fine. Um, there wasn't much for me to do from a physician standpoint except to find health, to build a more meaningful life together. And I was so excited to see him do that. So that's another great example of personalizing care in a different way. Interesting couple of cases I've had with cardio diagnostics. One in particular stands out to me. Uh, had a patient who, if you just looked at him, you would think he was pretty healthy. Fit guy, strong, exercised regularly, didn't smoke, none of that. Um, but had a period in his life, maybe 5 or 10 years before he joined the practice, where he was doing some hard drugs, doing IV drugs, and kind of was in a different place. And, any of the standard measurements were fine by this point, but cardio diagnostics put him at a very high risk category. And so we talked about, well, maybe we need to be very careful about maybe starting a statin, even though he was pretty young. I wouldn't have started it in any other circumstance. Being really diligent about VO2 max. He was strong, but he focused more on lifting than cardio. And I said, well, maybe we need to change up your training regimen a bit. And he had just inherited some high risk genes. And so the challenge was that whatever his behaviors were going to impact him more than those same behaviors in someone else. And that's one of the cool things that cardio diagnostics allows, is to say, well, sure, my other patient who does smoke some cigars once a month and does is overweight and doesn't lift, but he got lucky and he inherited low risk genes, and so he's kind of getting away with it and is in a lower risk category than you. And you unfortunately have to play the game very tightly. Um, and that insight would not be available without cardio diagnostics tests. There's I actually gave this discussion as part of my residency graduation thesis. Um, and one of the challenges we face in medicine is that quality of care is on a bell curve. There's an amazing article called The Bell Curve by Atul Gawande, one of my favorite medical authors. And he says that, quality of medical care is on a bell curve. And that's challenging because what do you do if you're going to the average doctor? It's not the best doctor, and maybe you could get better care, but is it enough to move across the country if that's where the best doctor is? It's challenging. The other challenge to your question is that the innovations all happen at the top. And the innovations in many ways happen from people that are disregarding the evidence, because the evidence happens from their innovations. So they disregard the evidence, generate their own ideas, their own methods of practice uh, about how they think healthcare should be practiced. And if they're right, then that drifts down to the middle. The problem is the people at the bottom of the bell curve are doing the same thing. They're disregarding the evidence, doing their own protocols, and they're just wrong. And so, in the moment, before science has been done, you can't really tell the difference between the bottom and the top of the bell curve. You can only tell how far away from average it is. And the challenge with innovation in healthcare is that we have to be willing to take that risk. And in an insurance driven environment where things are codified and regulated, I don't know that we would take those risks. I think about like some of the cardiac surgeries we consider standard now, like artery bypass. DeBakey literally got Dacron, which is still the fabric that's used for those grafts, because it was on sale at Hobby Lobby or wherever his wife was shopping for her sewing, right? And he sterilized it and sewed it into an artery and hoped it worked, right? we couldn't do that today. And there's some good things about the fact that we couldn't do that today, but there's also challenges about how do we innovate. The average time between an innovation being truly scientifically proven and the time between it's adopted as the standard of care is 13 years in healthcare. But at the same time, then we see people like Huberman and those kinds of guys pushing snake oil, and the people who want to be early adopters are jumping onto stuff that's complete nonsense. So I think one of the challenges we're going to face in medicine evolving and adopting innovations is how do we, number one, stop doing observational trials and start doing really hardcore double blind placebo controlled randomized trials. And if you make a claim, it shouldn't be on the basis of data, it should be on the basis of a double blind trial. Well, um, right now, I have finally congealed a lot of my thoughts into a more presentable format. So, um, one of the quotes I'm very fond of is Bruce Lee's quote that it is not daily increase, but daily decrease. Hack away at the unessential. And so that's kind of become my first law of RiverRock is let's get rid of the unessential. Let's stop doing things that don't matter very much. So testing cholesterol in 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds, it just doesn't matter. Let's do, and then the second law of RiverRock, I will say, is do the essential. So do the things that matter. VO2 max, cardiovascular exercise, strength training, social connectedness. Don't smoke. And if you have high blood pressure after all of that, then manage that. Those things move the needle, right? And then the third law of RiverRock would be to prioritize the subjective over the objective. And that goes against a lot of our culture. A lot of our culture is focused on, oh, well, the objective metrics are the things that matter. And we use longevity and we use biomarkers and we use all those things when in fact the thing that matters most is the subjective. One of my favorite examples is Rory Sutherland. The British government apparently built a new train system from Great Britain to France called the Eurostar, and they spent something like £6 billion building this thing. And it was a faster trip. It shortened the journey from something like 2.5 hours to an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. So maybe 40 or 50 minutes faster for the trip. But he pointed out that if they had just put Wi-Fi on the original train, it would have cost them a tenth of the cost, and it would have been a way better journey. So would you rather spend 2.5 hours with Wi-Fi, or would you rather spend an hour and 50 minutes without Wi-Fi? And most of us would choose the 2.5 hours with Wi-Fi. You can still get work done. You can still do all those things. So his joke was that you could have just put Wi-Fi on the train and you could have hired the world's supermodels to walk up and down the train, serving high-end wine, and people would be asking you to slow the train down, and you'd still have $5 billion left over. And so the idea there is just prioritizing the subjective experience. And in our case, in RiverRock's case, that's meaning, purpose, fulfillment, and what Jung used to call individuation. Uh, Putting meaning into life, I think that should be the priority far and above pure longevity or even health span, the way that most people talk about it. Um, Putting that message out into the world is kind of the project for 2025, is taking this mental model and putting that out into the world, and shouting it somewhat coherently, I hope, as far as I can shout it on the YouTube channel and social media and everywhere else, and then having the proof from the patients that have already kind of experienced this and gotten the benefit of it to realize that that mental model is a much more effective target of optimization. So that's the plan for 2025 and beyond 2025, is just to get that mental model out. One of my favorite quotes from Jung is that he says, as far as we've been able to determine, the purpose of life is to shine a light of meaning into the darkness of mere being. And shining that light is, I think, the goal for RiverRock as a whole, in 2025 and forever after, I hope.